All right. Welcome to this amazing panel. I'd just like to say my name is Hal Kirkland. I am a creative director at Hebe Dragons and a VR director as well. And it's an honor to be on stage with 4 people who are infinitely more intelligent than I will ever be. And I think that it's ordinarily a moderator would probably be similar to a tour guide, but in this instance, you can consider me as a security guard at a museum that's telling everyone not to take any photos. So I'm just going to let these wonderful people introduce themselves and tell them a little bit about what they do, and then we're going to start to dig into the debate, which is protagonist or spectator. Take it away.
Hi, so my name is Samantha Lang. Traditionally, I've worked as a film director, and I've worked also in some television and theatre. I guess I'm here today because I was at the conference this time last year and really thinking about what kind of audience experience VR might create within that content area. And I'd also seen not long before a show called Prehistoric Aquarium that Earth Theatre had put on. And I was really fascinated to explore the way that live experience might intersect with technology, with the technology of VR, and also specifically how that might work for children. Prehistoric Aquarium was a show that children watched and participated in. So I was curious to see how that might work in VR. And really serendipitously, John Maynard, who was here at Carriageworks, knew Scott Wright, who's the creative artistic director of Earth, and Scott had wanted to do a VR and had been speaking with Katrina Cedric at ACME. So we got together and embarked on a journey of how to turn Prehistoric Aquarium into prehistoric VR. So I guess I'll be part of speaking about that whole notion of the protagonist in VR, the protagonist as the user as protagonist in VR, because that was something that we interrogated a lot and over a long time, and with children kind of participating in some of our tests in the last sort of 6 to 8 months. And we just shot our first VR last week.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Emma. I'm currently working at Foreign Correspondent at the ABC. My background sort of spans 10 years of filmmaking, mostly in doco, but a bit of drama, which I'm hoping is going to help with VR design. Currently, Foreign Correspondent's looking, it's the perfect brand, I guess, for the ABC in terms of going places and meeting people that you would otherwise not get to meet. So from that, we're really exploring VR in that sense. But we're trying to take it to the next level beyond 360 social, which the ABC has been producing a lot of, and take it to that next level. So I'm really interested in talking about the protagonist and spectator, but looking at interactivity, that lean back and lean forward.
I'm Rosie Lourde. I am a cross-platform screen producer and writer-director. I was working on a project, a multi-platform show called Starting From Now that I'm a producer on. We were about to go into pre when I was actually picked up as an actor to go and shoot a Tourism Australia job for a couple of weeks. And I was on the road for 2 weeks with the guys from Finch as they were shooting the 360 content. And whilst we were on the road, they were stitching on the fly to see them putting the content together, whilst my brain was also trying to grapple with going to pre on a shoot, and started getting really fascinated by where the overlap sat with the 360 and with narrative, and then started thinking about what it would be to have a protagonist, or at that stage an inactive protagonist, at the core of a story. And then when this conference happened last year and the announcement was made for the fund, put my hand up like Sam and was picked up. My project Breach was one of those that was picked up to go into early development. And we shot the first bits of that about a month ago, and we're in post on it. Got a clip to show of it, which is really raw, so please don't judge it too badly. I'm not sure if now we want to show it or not. Yeah? Okay, we can.
You have to
all of us.
They're here.
Already?
You have to keep quiet.
So I was kind of inspired, thank you. I was inspired by like thinking about different times in your life where you don't have that agency and you are completely reliant on other people, and obviously the time of being a newborn or an early infant really struck me, and started playing around with ideas around that. And oh yeah, I just wanted to, and it's completely off topic, but I just wanted to show, we hit gender parity across the shoot, and we did it really quite easily, and that was our amazing team for the day. Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I'm working on at the moment. Yeah.
Great. I'm Barry Pousman, and honor to be up here with all of you smart people. I have been in virtual reality since the end of 2014. I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to go shoot what became Clouds Over Sidra, and for the UN and within, and it turned into kind of a model for documentaries in VR, and turned into kind of, before that, no one really thought there would be edits in VR. No one really, it was new, and people didn't realize what a movie might look like in VR. And I mean, it was kind of magical that it all came together, and it took a lot of effort. But that led the way, I think, for the world to realize how powerful VR can be for real world change. And so my focus since that has been around leveraging VR for real world change, which includes education, and we've gotten to work on some pretty cool stuff at Discovery VR. We created a piece that was sort of, we have this story, the Magic School Bus. Do you guys have that here? Mm-hmm. Magic School Bus? Okay, so so that was kind of the conceit was, could we be a small part inside of a larger system and understand that system from the inside out, for young audiences? And it really worked out great. We got like 4 million views on YouTube. So, we were able to kind of convert that into people sharing and taking action. And so, but then we kind of kept exploring what would, and sometimes we would do third person sort of spectator style stuff and have like the surfer teach you how to surf, but he's on the board too. And sometimes you might step inside the shoes of someone with a neurological phenomenon like synesthesia. What would that be like from inside their eyes? So we've played with both, and both of those. And for me, I've gotten more and more into convergence and sort of where interactivity and cinema kind of align and add value. And so more and more that becomes like simulation. And I'm looking for opportunities more and more like maybe Notes on Blindness and other films like that, where like interactivity kind of drives story and finding those magical moments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what everyone's saying in regards to the characters that they're choosing, to create this sort of POV from, like, you chose an infant in your piece. It'd be good for everyone to kind of just talk about the creative decision and the character, whether or not it is a character or if you're outside of that character. What was the creative process that you chose from that to create that viewpoint for the audience?
I think in our case, Scott and I talked a lot. I mean, he's had a lot of experience working in theatre and with children, and I went and saw some more of his shows. And then for me, I was thinking about how in cinema, it can be a flight simulator for emotions. So we were sort of talking about what happens in cinema, what happens in theatre, and also in the show that I'd seen, some of the kids get up on stage and take part in the show. And so one of the things for me was, the camera is one of the kids up on the stage. And we were fortunate in that Start VR had use of the Nokia Ozo, and we took that to Perth while the show was on, and we sat it on the stage for a couple of shows, and then we could really look at that material and also look at how the kids were interacting and think about the position of the camera. And from those tests, we then developed, for example, the camera is at the height of the child. in one part of it, there's a big anglerfish who comes and eats some of the bioluminescence, and we talked about, oh, well, wouldn't it be great if now that anglerfish came and ate us? So then we looked at how we would create how we'd reconstruct the puppets and adapt them for the camera to go through the gut of the anglerfish. And we sort of put all sorts of things like plastic. Well, the great puppet maker Steve put there were lots of plastic pieces, and then we used the crane to crane through the belly and come out the other side, so that you were both the child and also the child as if you were in the ocean. So we did lots of tests to look at what would both tell the story of moving from the bottom of the sea 20 million years ago up to the surface, and how you might interact with those animals, but equally that rather than us being in a zoo or an aquarium, the child might be the thing that the animals were interested by, so that the fish came towards the camera and went away. And so there were lots of different things that we tried. And then also we talked about, in order to help the viewer as child align with it, then we put some children into the film. And then sometimes they interact with the camera, and sometimes they're away in the ocean playing with other creatures. So there are kind of lots of different things that we...
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, because I think as soon as you take on the responsibility of being the protagonist, you can't help but ask all of the different questions, like, where's my body?
Yeah.
Where are my hands? Why aren't my hands moving?
Too much suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, and you're kind of, as much as you're starting to try and role play, that can kind of step you out of it a little bit.
And then it kind of heads more towards gaming. So it's like, I know a lot of, just recently, I know Clouds of Sidra is definitely, for me, was an inspiration behind our project, which is looking at the environmental impacts in the South Pacific. So the idea being that the Solomon Islands particularly is at the forefront of some of the most dramatic environmental impacts that we'll have, but through characters. So, what was interesting is looking at how the gaming industry actually looks at that role play, and we sort of tried to almost like, you are the foreign correspondent. But within that, it was sort of heading more towards a game-like sort of experience. So bringing that back and allowing people actually to be themselves, but how do you allow people to still be themselves in an environment that they're not actually in, effectively, but giving them that immersion sort of to guide them through.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think also, going along with that, I think that even if you don't see the body, but you are the camera and you are in that place, I think that there's still this adoption of believing that you are in that scene. And I think that sometimes that can also spark from how everyone interacts with you.
Yeah.
Like even in your clip, Rosie, how instantly you use that, it's a filmic, even painting, drawing, real life connection with eye contact. So talk to us about that.
Well, for me that was a really big thing. I really wanted to play with VR. For me, the thing that, like, the big conversation around VR is so much empathy, but I actually find what Lynette was saying about intimacy being so potent, and being in that particular state as a young child, like what that intimacy is with that bond that you build so quickly with your mum, and that in the headset, like she's right here, like her face is like in your face. And so I was working with the team over at the Pulse, and we spoke quite a lot about how to build that, and whether first person was where we want to start, because we actually, throughout the whole piece, we actually swapped between first person and third person. But because we wanted to build that emotional response and reaction in the relationship first up, we wanted to start with us in that first person, so that when we cut to a third person, you have a disembodied, like an out-of-body experience, and you can see yourself, you still have that emotional tie and that connection to those relationships. Because it is that visceral, emotional immersion that VR really has the capacity for, when the story can really hit you on that level. And we're experimenting, as all of us are, obviously, so we may or may not get there, but that's what we're aiming for at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you speak about jumping between two worlds. So what you're doing is you're inviting an audience member to make that connection, so that they jump into the role of someone and therefore are invited into your story. and then you might take a third person angle in order to tell the rest of the story, or so that you're not beholden to following that exact point of view of the narrative, because these days now we have the freedom of jumping between multiple viewpoints in order to tell a story.
And it is restrictive. Telling a story purely from first person really limits what you have the capacity for as a filmmaker, and also the world view of the audience. So we want to be able to play with how do we overlap, how do we really blend the cinematic features that we're also used to watching, but in a space that is complete immersion, that is very new for us.
And Barry, I mean, you were talking about a billion different ways of jumping between that, with a whole range of different stories, from documentary to seeing through the eyes, from someone that was under anesthesia, was it?
Oh, it's synesthesia.
Oh, synesthesia,
Yeah,
okay.
where you hear in colors.
Okay, cool, yeah. So yeah, talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of kind of jumping between first and third person, but in my experience, we find that as long as you kind of keep the voice the same, then the visuals are sort of reinforcing the voice, and the voice, at least in my experience, has been a lead. Now, we recently did a piece out of Nepal that's here on the headsets, and recommend everyone check it out. It's called Ground Beneath Her, and it has very little voice. It's kind of a musical in a way, or music video in a way. It's sort of builds these like diegetic sounds into like this song, and we were trying to look for a space away from that first person perspective, like how far can we get outside that before it just becomes a fly on the wall, before you get outside that inside perspective, which we're trying to share with people around the world, is like, what is it like to be from that place, or be, of that mindset. And so, but I do agree about the limitations of that, like a very narrow first person only world.
And particularly for, foreign correspondence sits within the News and Current Affairs division of the ABC. So there's this and I'm sure you've had that as well, this push and pull with what is journalism within that space, and what is the audience's role in journalism. And we see that even with social media, in terms of actually people contributing content. But if you're actually, as a filmmaker, as a docu-maker, just relinquishing your power to the audience, then how do you actually control the story in a way that's going to actually get a meaningful, not only story, but impact as well, like for social change reasons or for whatever your outcome is.
Yes.
And I think it is that thing of culturally we're so hardwired to think of us as looking at a screen, and then so that screen is filtered through editing and where we point the camera. With VR, you don't have those same tools, so you have to start thinking about, as Lynette's spoken to, what are the influencing elements that you have, and sound seems to be a really huge one. And in a way that's really exciting. And I'm really fascinated to see the liquid cinema, that end-to-end, how you might be able to direct someone's attention, but equally think about, well, if you are influencing the experience in 360, it's still important to know what you're placing in that space at what moment, and so when should things come in and go out. And obviously in journalism you don't always have that control, but it is just rethinking the language, because we're just dealing with a different language.
Yeah. And I think
Making it.
particularly we've been in development for a while, but we have to find the right story that's going to allow us, not just location, but I guess my argument within my team is that a lot of the time the talent has to be able to be directed to some degree if we're going to be manipulating situations to work for us. We want to move beyond that fly on the wall spectator. You have no role within the story. It doesn't mean I want to go full gaming, but give some sort of reason for us to be there. And I kind of liken it to, I know we put on the headset, but it's almost like you put on a mask, right? It's similar to gaming, where you are still you, but you learn knowledge as you go, you're exploring. There's that, if you want to, the ability to lean forward enough or just sit back. So sort of playing with that scale, I guess. And I'm sure, with your projects, I know, some of them that I've seen, you've really sort of played with what those two approaches are.
Yeah, we look at kind of who the audience is maybe
Yeah.
for those specific things and where they're going to see it. So we have a kind of new project we're thinking about that's in development right now, and it's geared toward 360 video on Facebook exclusively.
Yeah.
And so I'll just reveal the conceit of the show. So the idea is it's a cooking show, but it's from refugees' households around the world. So recipes from refugees,
Yeah.
sort of idea, right? And it's we found that when you do a quick deep dive into BuzzFeed videos and sort by popularity, 30 out of the top 50 are cooking shows. And it's just like, how do you make these lasagnas and pastas and things? And so, great, we'll make falafel and hummus, it's gonna be beautiful, and we're gonna make the world a better place that way. And so we feel like, okay, we can get 18 million views, this is where the audience is. How can we leverage what we know about how people cook, right? So you need your countertops, you have your phone, you're watching the video, maybe put your phone down on the table. Now all of a sudden, because we have a spherical video, maybe down is its own screen. Maybe down says crack 3 eggs and do something different here. And so like leveraging the idea of the sphere in ways that like your audience is going to directly relate.
Yeah. And that's great as well, because it's like you're working backwards, right? Like you're looking at where the audience is, so the context, their behavior, who they are. So narrowing down to, like even down to not just ages, but where they're living, what device they're using. I think like one of the questions that we have, particularly, within our team at ABC is I don't feel like, I mean, personally, I don't feel like I have enough knowledge on audience behaviors of what people actually want in that experience and analyzing what works at an audience level, not just as I know how many films I want to make, but it's not really it's not just for me, like particularly as I work for the ABC, so it's definitely not about, so understanding those behaviors that then can inform those decisions at a, like that just sounds like a great example of that.
We think about it as like human-centered design.
Yep.
So, and then we've seen a lot, someone mentioned theater, theater. So I've been seeing that as kind of evolution of rapid prototyping in VR storytelling would be thinking about your rapid prototyping sessions as rehearsals, blocking them as such, bringing in someone that's a stranger from the co-working space or wherever, and having them stand in the middle of this play that your colleagues are putting on. And what if I've seen folks do it in with those flip pads, the white flip pads with markers.
Yeah.
So imagine you have 6 of those on easels in a circle, and you grab a stranger, put them in the middle, and the first shot is all on page 1 of all the flip pads. The second shot is all on page 2 of the flip pads. So everyone's like kind of flipping them, narrating it along. And that person in the middle is saying like, oh, I'm a little confused. Who's this guy? Like, how come I got turned around? And you kind of discover those moments before you go out and spend that money against. So I love that idea of like researching and thinking about
User
that.
testing effectively,
Yeah.
to
And
inform what you shoot. Yeah.
You had asked about that, so like I think that could be one way to kind of think about it. Like put
great.
on a rehearsal in your space and just have strangers come in and go
Definitely.
through.
Yeah.
It almost feels like ergonomic filmmaking. Where you're actually using, the dimensionality of like everything around you in order to actually plan your blocking and where everyone is.
I think that is right, and I think that's what's so exciting about VR is that it is human-centered experience. So you're always thinking, well, why am I using VR? What is the experience I'm hoping for from the audience? And I know when we did the tests and we cut together a trailer, we gave it to some children, and it was fascinating to watch the way that, say, when a dinosaur came over, they all crashed to the ground. And so we sort of used that as part of, because it will go on to be an installation at ACME, that is part of a performance in itself. So you put a group of kids together and watch them moving to that experience. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah.
And how much have you all had a chance to experiment? Like that's one scenario. We've had some easels. That's something that a learning that you've gained from seeing how kids react to the, part of that experience. Talk to me, or talk to all these guys, about, how much experimentation you've been able to get away with, almost. Or unless it's a part of the process, an inherent part of the process.
I think you learn by experimenting. I think you've got to just do as much as you possibly can. And I know when we got the development grant, it was let's test by making, and you have to fail. You have to get things wrong, and in order to find a way to make them work. And so that is sort of the crucial, most fundamental part of the process, I think.
And it's changing so quickly,
Oh,
the
yeah,
industry.
really
Like,
quickly.
you know, the original pitch that we put together for phone, even the gear, post-production workflows changed, you know, and that definitely informs where we shoot, how we shoot. You know, the fact that we don't need a supply of power, like, you know, we can shoot in remote location. All these things really sort of allow you to keep testing and experimenting. And I know actually the only user testing I've done was actually here for the Bjork exhibition. We all came here as a team, sort of came, and I basically just took the goggles off and watched everyone how they use it. And how many people just didn't look around, you know, unless they were really directed. So I'm like, I've worked in sound design and I love sound, so the idea of using that to sort of get people to look around, or different sort of triggers and techniques of that. But I would love the time to do more testing, and you know, that sounds like a great idea, and particularly in storyboarding. It's scene development, isn't it really? Like, it's not a linear way, and it's almost like a mind map of a user journey of where and how people can experience it.
We did a fair amount of tech testing, because it's essentially, we shot single take live action, so we had to play quite a fair bit with which cameras we wanted to use to figure out what proximity we could get to the cameras, but then also blocking in terms of how we could structure shots so that we have a bit later in it where we have someone taking up most of the vision, but we need to be able to see through their arm over there and under their arm over here, and to figure out what the physical placement was of the people. And then also, as you saw, we have a camera move, so we were playing with what it is to actually pick the camera up and move it whilst you're in the middle of the take. And so all of that required a fair amount of trial and error across the whole team. Because even though that was in mono, we've actually shot it in stereo, so we're doing that and playing with that right now, but to figure out what was going to wig it out, and then which lights we could, like all of those things. So that was all really invaluable, but now we're getting to the sticky end where we're taking it through post, and we need to start testing on fresh eyeballs who have no idea. Yeah, exactly. And not people who know what they're looking at.
But also getting random, as you said,
Exactly.
the best user testing I've ever done in previous projects is getting someone that has never ever heard of what you're talking about. They don't know the jargon, you know, like just throwing people in the deep end and seeing what happens. And apparently, you have so many assumptions.
Apparently I've got a cast iron stomach, so I'm the worst person to test on, because everything, I love everything. I need someone who's like really sensitive, who's going to vomit like at the moment the horizon goes or something. Yeah.
We've been exploring more and more development, and so that is a very different workflow than the traditional production workflow. And although they kind of call it agile, which is like sort of iterative, and they can be quick about it, it still takes, 2 weeks, you know, before any change, where you can sort of visualize an iteration, and at least in my experience. And so that is a limiting factor, and kind of that quick and dirty kind of turnaround. Oh, let's reshoot it. Oh, we looked at the footage today. Last night, you know, we crunched it. We looked at it this morning. Oh, let's reshoot that scene. Let's, you know, you can kind of like get stuff done quickly in a production way sometimes. And with Unity coding and just coding in general, it's a slower process.
I think that's really interesting, because we use the Ozo, and they have a native software, and we're working with Afters in a sense to do a research paper on post-production workflows. And one of the things that we had, in fact, was that we shot, and they were able to render it out, and we could look at MP4s within about 2 hours. So in fact, we did reshoot. So we shot one day, and then the next morning we reshot, because we just didn't feel that experience would work for the narrative and the kind of flows.
I imagine being able to actually put on the goggles and view it in that sense.
Yeah, and in fact, the other thing that we did, which was very useful, well, it was useful for me and sometimes not always for Scott, was that while we were shooting, we had a screen, so we were behind blacks, and I could put on the goggles and look at the whole thing as it was filming. And then the only thing was that sometimes Scott was like, well, he couldn't see what he needed to see because I was looking somewhere else. So we needed 2 screens, but I found that, you know, really incredibly useful. Just also trying to simulate that experience for the user as it was happening. So
Yeah, we've seen that on set before. I did a shoot with Emblematic Group, Nani De La Peña's team, and we went out to Indonesia, and they had a guy on set who was just a stitcher, overnight stitcher, and so every morning we'd watch the dailies.
Wow.
And it was so powerful. You get 30 seconds of these shots. I mean, we definitely went out and reshot stuff. We were like, oh, the frame rate's weird, or like that kid's running, it looks all jittery. We gotta, I don't know, this isn't working. And so we found that is like one of the best ways to just make sure you get quality product.
Because it must be in the documentary landscape, you know, I think you guys were touching on it before, but you know, there's something to just film something and film this slice of life, or, you know, trying to capture and just leave the camera running. But with, you know, these kinds of cameras, there isn't that much flexibility. And I think that you do have to really go in with a thought. Like I think about all of the things that I've filmed and how sort of premeditated they are. How do you find like the sort of that changeover to in sort of a documentary format? You know, how much planning has to go into it before you sort of start that shoot?
I mean, I guess for us, we're at this planning, storyboarding stage. But as we all know with any shoot, particularly in doculand, nothing ever goes to plan. So with, you know, foreign, we generally shoot a half hour of TV in 2 weeks. And with our particular project that we're doing a full multi-platform project. So the VR is one component, which is all about rising sea levels in a remote community in Nuatambu and Choiseul. So that component, that part of the story has been particularly picked for VR because we know, well, we hope that it will work in that particular platform. And then we'll be creating a half hour of broadcast TV along with a full multi-platform strategy. But for us, I guess, in terms of the planning stages, I also have always found on shoots that some of the best gems are the things that you didn't plan for. And what is exciting for me about being able to shoot in 360 is if you can get people to almost forget it's there, there's actually no crew. So, you know, you can not be there, you know, and like the characters that we're going to be talking to or will be talking to us, you know, there's a lot of kids and a lot of sort of really powerful characters that if we can get that message across from their own voice to the camera, it's taking us away, which to me is that it's another barrier lifted off. So, you know, if you think of a filmmaker, then you've got like talent, filmmaker, camera, screen. If you take us out, I don't know, for me that's kind of exciting to think about actually getting directly to audiences. So character, you know, is talking directly to you as the audience. Yeah. So, I mean, it's exciting. I think the unknown is more exciting than not.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
For us, as we think about Unity, you know, just the planning matters more, kind of. So you have to be more meticulous in a way, and kind of, we're working on this potential story right now where it would be in a single family home, but you'd have some agency. You'd be able to go over to the bookshelf and sort of that story would come alive, or you'd be able to go over to the kitchen and that little moment would come alive. And as we think about that, you know, we kind of pitch it like that. We pitch it as this, it has to be really detailed for both the pitch and for the developers to kind of sign off on the cost. And because that boxes you in once you get there and it's all different and that family is the wrong family and the house doesn't look anything like you imagined it would. And so like now you're like working backwards from this budget instead of from your desired outcome.
Yeah.
And so that's where we do face some trouble sometimes in that space.
Do you sometimes account for interactivity and you go, well, we could do this and this and this, and you kind of like go through this, you know, this Rolls-Royce plan of what it should be, and then eventually like, this is, now I don't get the story. Or you just like, you go almost like too far. Like, is that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems in VR is really where the technology drives the creative, you know, when it sort of breaks from the classic 70s, you know, all these filmmakers that drove the technology with their vision of what the story should be. So Robert Altman famously was like, someone make a multi-channel recorder so we can have these complex conversations going on in rooms and make our audiences feel more immersed in those rooms. We need multi-track recording. And so he like made his people invent that. And in some ways, I think Chris Milk kind of follows that, where he pushed the technology to follow his vision. Now that technology is sort of off on its own race, in some ways artists and creators don't quite know how to catch up to that speed, and it's like, do I make something in room scale for the Vive? What's next? Do I have voice input? How do I, you know, the most recent piece from Chris Milk, Life of Us, is beautiful, and it has two people in the same movie, and you can see each other in the movie. You're like characters in the movie. It's wild. I mean, but I think that we could end up in danger kind of of ending up where we lose this story because we have this technology, and it's like so much wow factor, and then no one's like getting affected.
Yeah, but I think we'll find an equilibrium as well, because we are going down that path already where people are creating these incredibly interactive pieces where you're not really engaged, but you are just doing the things. But then there are the incredibly non-interactive pieces where you are engaged, and then there's the mix in the middle where we're just gonna keep oscillating until we find, or maybe they'll just end up being different markets, and we'll end up having.
And they're different experiences, because I think that the value that storytelling has is that it helps us align with characters that we may never have met, and that VR has the potential to do that in a way that's different to just a visceral experience like going on a roller coaster. And I think that VR does seem to traverse many of those completely different possibilities. So it's again going back to, well, what do I want the user or the audience experience to be, and how am I going to use this technology to create it, and is it the appropriate technology, or how do I need to change it in order to get that out there?
It's what I constantly am asking why. So why, I mean, we don't have to, why are we using VR? And then when we're in VR, why are we using this, why do we need this scene or this character or this trigger? Or so making sure that there's always a reason, not just for the wow factor, because that gets old pretty quick. I mean, VR it does make you go wow when you first start, when you first experienced it, but we need, as you said, to take it to that next level and ensuring that story is first, and that we are taking care of the story, so it's not just about the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we're dealing with is that it is so new, and I think that we're not a sophisticated audience yet. We're as creators even, and I feel that one of the biggest threats that we've faced is that technology is advancing so much, like where 360 was, that's where we were, and then suddenly 1 year later, just say at Sundance, the major things there are all insanely interactive pieces with like rumble packs and all of this stuff, right? And so it's like, wait a minute, what happened to 360? I was only just perfecting that, or like I was only
got a handle on it.
So hopefully, there will be that time that opens up where we actually we figure out craft. And I think that the sophistication of what we expect, as opposed to once we overcome the spectacle of putting a headset on and we're like, wow, I'm in a forest. Or, wow, I'm in my own house. Once we get over that, I think that we can start to go, wow, this acting is incredible. Because I think that there's so much just like bombarding us that, that it's like we're missing all these things, and once that sort of the special technology gets out of the way, we can actually start to appreciate.
I look at, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
Well, I just look at like IMAX, sort of the evolution of IMAX theaters and that experience for audiences, because it was also like nascent audience time where people imagined that they would get nauseous after 20 minutes. It was like a perception problem. And the industry, the making of the films, the projections, it wasn't perfected, and it did it was like the frame rate wasn't perfected and all that. And so over time, the technology, the best practices got better and tighter, and the audiences got better at watching, and the perception had changed. And so it kind of went from those science-only, like museum, 20-minute long experiences of the Serengeti or sharks or whatever to, every major motion picture is now like shot in IMAX and down-resed. So it's just sort of an evolution, I think, that we'll fall into with VR as well.
But it's going to be across all the different areas and departments as well. Like you just mentioned acting. We need to learn how to act for VR. It's a very different thing. And we need to learn how to direct for VR. It's a completely different medium. And so every different, like makeup for VR, and then like not to mention sound and how sound is evolving massively and so quickly. It's everyone playing their own little part in the whole puzzle. That's going to grow the industry.
Yeah. And I also think one thing that everyone's been mistaking the industry as is everyone thinks VR is a genre, right? So it's like saying movies, like film is a genre.
Yeah.
And so I think that all of the things that you're talking about, people will want 360 or people will want to passively consume a 360 experience. But other people will want agency, other people will want these things. And as time goes on, it'll just start to become more diverse, and then each one of those markets will start to become sophisticated, and people will be able to concentrate. But at the moment, everyone is just trying to do everything, thinking that they have to do everything. But I think that there's gonna be a real craftsmanship and craftsladiship to that.
I think that's what was so interesting about what Anna was talking about this morning about, intentionality, having a framework, and really thinking about, okay, with this language, which is what VR is, how do I want to see that language being used in 10 years' time? Obviously people are going to use it for pornography and for horror because they're visceral thrills, just like in the movies we can watch pornography and horror. But how, where is the kind of really useful social impact going to occur with this language? And I think those are the questions that are beyond the technology. They are, well, let's look at how that's going to be delivered, who might watch it, and how we can get it out to them. It's really
I think what's interesting about your project also is that you're creating art and an experience for kids. So you're already stepping into the psychology of an audience, which, yes, we can imagine it to some degree, but I think that's like a brave sort of territory to jump into. And how have you found that is different to sort of like jumping into the minds of adults?
Well, I think a starting point or a point of interest was that that kids weren't allowed to watch VR. So I know when the David Attenborough VR came to the Australian Museum, I couldn't take my children to see it. So that kind of raised the question of, well, what might VR for children look like, and how might it be safe, and how might it be useful to them? And I'd also seen there was a fellow who's working at Microsoft, and he talked about the future of work and shown something about a video of kids having interactivity with someone who was swimming in the ocean, but they were connected to that person's view and could touch what they were seeing and would come up with information. So I was thinking, that's really interesting. How might that you replicate that in VR? So that was the first thing. And then I guess it's what's a soft experience? How are they not going to feel sick? How are we going to guide them through the experience in a way that's going to be at their level but not speaking down to them? And I think that's to do with testing. And I know, say, Scott Wright, he's really great with the way that he interacts with children, so I had a lot of faith in his capacity to read their reactions to the material, and then for us to kind of start creating from there.
That's great.
And also not to make it too long to think about. And the other thing was that because, hopefully it will go on at ACME in a bubble, it will be a kid-only zone. So it's that notion of making a space that is just for children. It's not a sort of shared space. It's just they go in there and that's their special place, and they watch this, and again the camera being at their level, and all of those considerations, like they are the protagonists, really.
Yeah. That's great. Well. Thank you to these amazing guests. I actually just want to put it out to the audience, like if anyone has any questions about all of what we've been speaking about, because I think this would be the perfect time for that. Anyone out there? I'm a Pisces, by the way, if that's one of the questions.
Hal, I've got a question to get the questions started. I think everybody who's a practitioner in VR has had that experience of a jolt of exhilaration and joy where you go, wow, and you get a struck by lightning by the potential of this medium. Could you guys illuminate us with any of those moments that you've had yourselves that kind of tipped you over and made you think, I have to get into this?
Sure. So I was actually, it was before we left for Clouds Over Cedra, and I went to the Verse office at the time in LA, and they showed me the camera. And this is 2014. I'd never seen a virtual reality thing. I didn't even know what that meant, really. And they showed me this camera, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, it doesn't have that many buttons on it. I think I'll figure this out. And they're like, okay, now here's what it makes. And they showed me a Samsung Gear VR, and in 2004, I didn't realize Samsung was making VR screens or whatever. And so put this thing on, put the headphones on, and what it was, I don't know if you've seen this, but Andy, the guy who created the camera, it was just footage of one take of his living room, and he's on the couch and his dog's running around, and you kind of see the dog, and you're in the living room, you're standing up, adult height, and I'm watching it standing up. And the dog runs over to him, and he picks up the dog, and he walks over to the camera. And the dog gets pretty close to the camera, and the dog is pretty close to me, of course, watching the thing. So it's like sniffing and panting and licking, and like it's in my personal bubble. And I was like, I had the chills, like on the back of my neck, hair standing on the back of my neck. And in that moment, I was like, I get what this thing does. It's like a human transport device. And you could just put humans in other places. And so then that's what we did. And that's kind of the inspiration of the shooting at the height of the child in Clouds Over Cedar was like, oh, I need to transport people to like a child perspective, because it's like, then they'll be short and they'll like look on the world like a child. Kind of relate back. So anyway, that was my first exposure.
The stuff that I'd seen really early on, I really liked the VR, but it wasn't until at the conference last year when I saw Lynette's Collisions, and it really touched me. And we were talking before, like that was the first time where I realized that crying inside the headset is actually going to be a major problem. and so then it was actually when I was watching Barry's and like Clouds and Waves that I realized that I needed to fold up tissues to put them inside the headset as I was watching, so I didn't just absorb into the thing. But then actually most recently watching Rose Troche's new piece, If Not Love, which is on the headset over there, really hit me in terms of a really dynamic storytelling capacity with that really rich emotional content from a scripted perspective.
That's great.
I guess for me, particularly at Foreign, but also just in my background in doco making, the biggest thing for me is to get people's stories across in a way that I'm not in the story. So for VR, I can't even remember what story it was first, but I know I went and saw the David Attenborough at the Australian Museum, and that just even, I hadn't been in a room with so many people watching a VR experience at the same time. But the ability to take people somewhere, as you said, it's like a teleporter, and shape a scene and give people an experience. I know that everyone bangs on a lot about empathy, but that intimacy that you get from feeling what other people are feeling, hopefully if you can get that across, and the ability to create social change, and just the places that I've been able to travel to and hear those stories that sometimes in my filmmaking I haven't quite got. So I'm hoping with VR, taking me even more out of it, and allowing people to speak directly to audiences, in somewhat of a fashion, can actually create more change in people, more meaningful change, I think, for stories is what really got me.
Look, I think, as everyone said, the empathy thing is a big factor, especially at a moment where we're kind of flooded with images that can sometimes both numb and paralyze us. Having the added dimension of VR really does change that, the interface between the viewer and the subject. I mean, for me, it was something very simple, which was, I think I downloaded onto my phone the Verse app, and I was watching a cow in a field, just literally watching the cow, and I showed it to my children, one of whom was, I think, about 6 at the time, and she was just so enchanted by being able to move around and see this cow that I was fascinated by her response to that. And then when they watched others, I just thought, this is really interesting, the way that they're responding, and I'd like to explore that further.
Thank you to our panel. We're going to hear more from Hal Kirkland when he gives a speech later on, but in the meantime, could we have a round of applause for this fantastic panel for sharing their time with us?
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's time to move on to our next